All right, yeah, welcome everybody to the 5th Merge community call. We've been trying to have these periodically in between the test nets, and we'll be having probably one more at least in advance of the big event. But this is the 5th one, and we're very happy to see everyone that made time to join here today. If you're an at-home validator, somebody who runs these for fun, or is just a member of the community, or you're a client team that's come to help troubleshoot stuff or answer questions, thank you for making the time to do this. So yeah, that's the intro. We can just jump right into the agenda. Or Tim, if you have things that are top of mind you wanted to start with. If not, we can go through testnet updates to start.
Yeah, sure. I guess the first thing, to mention on the testnets is 2 of them have merged already. So Ropsten and Sepolia are on proof of stake, along with Kiln, which was our merge testnet that we launched a while back. So if you're like a node operator or validator or smart contract developer or infrastructure provider, you don't need to wait to test this stuff. So, you can test your whole setup on Ropsten or Sepolia today, and, you won't run through the actual merge, but 90% of what you have to do, and maybe more than that even, you can do on a post-merge network. So that's the thing I would like strongly encourage people, anyone who like runs a node, either for a validator or not, this is the time to actually get on the network and figure out like what exactly you need to set up. Some folks at the EF who work on the merge launchpad, the staking launchpad, they've put together a checklist as well. So I strongly recommend just like going through that checklist and making sure you've got all the kinks worked out. Most importantly is probably just like making sure you authenticate your, take a step back. Most importantly is making sure if you're running a beacon node that you also run an execution layer node in tandem with it. So previously and up to the merge, it's possible to rely on a third-party provider because you're basically only getting specific data from the deposit contract. But after the merge, your node needs to validate the actual blocks on the network, and to do that, it needs a full execution client. So set that up, and the one quirk there is in order to ensure the communication between your beacon chain node and execution layer node is secure. There's a token that's passed, I guess an auth token, not like an ERC20 token, that's passed from one to the other. And that's something you can all like run through today. So strongly recommend doing that. The link I posted has like extensive documentation about it. And then similarly, if you're a validator, there's one more step, which is setting a fee recipient. So as a validator, post-merge, you receive transaction fees, which currently go to miners. So the portion of fees that's not burnt, you need to specify an address for those fees to be sent to. Otherwise, it depends on which client you run, but either things will break or they'll be sent to the 0x address, 0x0 address. So you want to specify an address that you control, and then you'll get those fees when you propose the blocks post-merge. But you can set all of this up again on a network today. If you want to run a validator, you can do so on Ropsten. Sepolia has a permission validator set, so it's not anyone who can do it there. But if you're just running a node that's not a validator node, you can do so on Sepolia, Ropsten, or Kiln, and that should be fine. I saw Danny, you had your hand up for a sec. Is there anything you wanted to add to that?
Sorry, I couldn't unmute. Yeah, you said it's like about 90% or even more of what you need to do. It's literally 100% of what you do. Like if you join the post-merge network, it's the exact same configuration of software pre-merge. It's just that maybe like logs and what you're exactly seeing as that's happening is slightly different. But if you can configure a node to run in post-merge, you can configure a node for the merge. It's all 100% of the steps.
Right, correct. Yeah. That's a good point. And then
one more thing is that the I do believe some consensus layer clients on mainnet releases today allowed you to begin to configure that fee recipient. So it's not something that you have to wait for. I know that was a goal of Lighthouse and some others, but I'm not 100% sure all of them do it yet.
nice. And then one more, I guess, final note on the test nets themselves. So like I mentioned, we already have 3 post-merge test net. We have one more, which is basically Gorley and Prater merging. Those are the 2 test nets with like the largest community on them. And we wanted to merge them kind of at the latest possible date in the process, such that the releases that go on there are maybe not final for mainnet, but definitely feature complete. And we discussed this on the consensus layer call yesterday. Roughly, we're going to be merging this around early August. So again, the merge has like this 2-step process where first is an upgrade on the beacon chain, and second, there's the actual upgrade on the execution chain, which hands over the consensus to the beacon chain. So you should expect this to happen early August. You should expect to have probably around like 7 to maybe 10 days once like the kind of parameters are chosen to run through the merge. So that means that, yeah, if you think that you need more than a week to like get set up on Gordy, please start looking at the other testnets now and just running a node there, and that'll get you basically, the entire setup up and running. But yeah, Gordy will be kind of the last testnets to fork before mainnet, and yeah, you could expect about a week to upgrade nodes there. And then for mainnet, it'll probably be more like 2-ish weeks. And the reason it might be a bit short is just because estimating the total difficulty is a bit hard. So there's like a limited window for which we can do so. So yeah, as a friendly heads up, you should expect Gordy is going to happen early August. You're going to have notice about a week before that to upgrade your nodes. And similarly, mainnet's going to happen after Gordy, and it'll probably be 2-ish weeks at most to upgrade your nodes prior to Bellatrix hitting, and then the TTD being hit after that.
Tim, I have a question.
Yeah.
What's the best way for someone to keep track of all this stuff? Where would they get updates?
I mean, this call is a good start. So it depends, what like level of detail you want. If you like, we have the R&D Discord, which is, like a very granular thing. So if you want to follow this day in, day out, that's probably the right place. I think if you want to follow like at a bit of higher level, there's the Alcor Devs calls now on Thursdays, and the consensus layer calls also on Thursdays. The agendas and live streams are linked in the Ethereum/PM repos, and the issues there at the same place as the agenda for this call is. So watching those, I think, gives you like a bit of a higher level kind of, basically we summarize everything that's happened in the Discord in the past 2 weeks. So if you don't want to keep an eye on that every day, that's probably the best place to be. And then Remy posted in the chat blog.ethereum.org. So I think once we do have like the official releases and, like a proper announcement, that's usually where it goes up first, and it also gets shared in other places. So this is kind of like the highest resolution of if you just want to follow from like a distance, then yeah, just keeping an eye out on the blog is probably the best place. We also have a mailing list now where we post the blog. So the mailing list is basically, I'll send you an email saying you have a new blog post. That's pretty much it. But yeah, Trent posted the link there. So once we do fork Gordy, and obviously when we fork mainnet, we'll send a ping in the mailing list there as well. So that's somewhere you can sign up. But yeah, I guess Discord, these types of calls, which are on the Ethereum/PM repo and blog.ethereum.org. Yeah, those are like the 3 main places.
Yeah, and if you want an email directly for these bigger events, then sign up to that Google group that I linked. Cool. We can keep going. Somebody had mentioned the consensus layer client balance earlier this year and part of last year. The concern was that Prism it had too large of a share of the network, and I think somebody brought up that Lighthouse is now approaching that 30% limit. So let's see what they suggested. Well, I guess they would just be proposing, if you're spinning up new validators, we'd encourage you to use something besides Prism or Lighthouse. If there are anybody from those teams that would be included in that definition and you want to jump in and show your client, feel free. But yeah, so if you're a new staker or you're thinking of spinning up nodes, just take into account client diversity and how it's important that we have a broad distribution of client types.
Yeah, I just posted in the chat, sometimes people wonder like, why is this important? And Dankrad has a really good post kind of going into the details of what are all the bad scenarios that can happen if there's too much concentration in a single client. Similarly, clientdiversity.org has a bunch of guides. Well, first it has some rough numbers for different clients, which is good. Second, it also has a bunch of guides to switch from one to the other, which is quite neat, and an option to submit guides. So if you have switched from, I don't know, Geth to Nethermind or Prism to Nimbus or whatever, and you want to write like a guide for others to do it, they have a one-page button to do that. But then they have guides for like some of the clients and how you can migrate from one to the other. So I strongly recommend having you look at that. And then one thing I'll add to that is it's also good to have client diversity on the execution layer. There are other execution layer clients as well. So it's worth it's worth changing there as well. There's a question in the chat about what's the tech knowledge level required to start solo staking. I don't know, is Super Fizz here? Because I know he was talking about that on Twitter yesterday to people.
I think Remy might be able to jump in.
Yeah, Remy, yeah, you wanna take that? I think he'd
sure. Sam, so there's different ways of doing it. If you want to deep dive, you can like go through the CLI commands yourself, follow a guide, but there's a bunch of different tools. Maybe I can paste all the tools that I usually recommend. There's tools that are like wizard-like, where you just click next, and answer a few questions, and you're done with it, pretty much. So all you need is either a machine or a VPS somewhere, and you can set up your own node and your own keys and your own validators very easily without much knowledge. So let me just try to find those guides and tools, and I'll paste them in a chat for you.
Awesome, thanks. Yeah, so go ahead.
No, I was just going to say the boilerplate stuff that we usually go over, like block times and stuff like that, but.
Okay, yeah, I was just gonna say, yeah, the node on post-merge testnet, so that's also worth noting. After the merge, the two testnets that will be maintained long-term are Gordy and Sepolia. If you're an application like on other testnets, you should migrate. And basically, the three other testnets, Kiln, Robston, and Rinkeby are considered deprecated now, and they'll be shut down gradually over the next year or so. So Kiln, we're going to shut down basically right after the mainnet merge. So the Kiln's purpose was just to be the first merge testnet when we were scared of breaking the existing ones. So as soon as we merge on mainnet and have the other testnets merged, it doesn't really have a ton of value. Robston will probably shut down sometime before the end of this year. And then Rinkeby, there's like a bit more applications on it, and people rely it. Yeah, you know, OpenSea is still on Rinkeby. People rely on it a bit more, so we're gonna give people a longer heads up to leave Rinkeby. So we expect to leave it up for maybe like a year after the merge. The caveat being that we're not running Rinkeby through the merge. So as soon as the merge happens, Rinkeby stops being like a good test net or a good staging environment for mainnet. And that'll be true of all the other networks that are deprecated as well. So say there was an upgrade, you know, this fall, Rinkeby and Robson are not getting it, and Norris Kiln. So yeah, like if you're still using Rinkeby, the network's not going to shut down for a while, but it's just going to become a worse and worse representation of what's on mainnet. It's not too bad in the case of the merge, you know, because there's only a couple there's only one opcode that changes. You know, block times change and whatnot, but it's still mostly the same experience for smart contracts. But say the Shanghai hard fork is going to introduce a bunch of new features, probably on the EVM, and so none of those would be available on Rinkeby. And so yeah, the delta between like Rinkeby and mainnet is going to just keep growing. So now's the right time to like start planning the migration. You know, you still have a couple months. But yeah, before the end of the year, Robson will be shut down, and then in the next year, Rinkeby will as well, and both will not be upgraded or maintained any further. There's an MEV-boost question. I don't know, either Danny or if someone from Flashbots wants to take it. Is there someone from Flashbots? Danny, do you want to take?
I think that means Danny has to take it.
Yeah, Danny, you want to take the MEV-boost one?
Hopefully he's not like, away from his computer doing something.
I can take it, worst case, but oh, I have to unmute him.
Hey, okay. What's the question? Where I'm looking in the chat. Where
could you give an overview about MEV-boost? How does it work? What's the different roles of layers, block builders, and client nodes?
Yeah. So generally, the architecture is you're on your consensus node, you're on our execution layer client. They talk together. Your validator keys are sequestered in a piece of software called the validator client. These three things can produce blocks. They can attest. They can do all that kind of stuff. In MEV world, it is often more valuable to get the transaction contents for your execution layer from a kind of a third-party market rather than just dipping into your mempool, because there are very sophisticated searchers in how they combine these transactions, and even private markets on getting transactions into blocks where people pay maybe higher fees. So there's an additional piece of software that is in active development. It's very much in kind of very proactive testing phase and doing some initial audits, and people are beginning to run it on these testnet forks. This is called MEV-boost. MEV-boost is a sidecar that sits right next to your consensus layer client and essentially gives your consensus layer client the ability to ask this network of builders, this network of searchers for valuable blocks. So essentially, not only if you add this MEV-boost sidecar, you not only can look into your mempool for valuable blocks, but you can ask this MEV network if they can give you maybe a more valuable block than what you have locally. And the way this works is does a little bit of a dance with these relays, essentially asks for bids. If there's a high enough bid, it would then kind of sign that bid and then make then the bid would be revealed and they would get the block and send it to the network. The nice thing is that this is kind of a parallel work stream to the existing consensus layer, execution layer, block building, and it's kind of additive in its functionality rather than kind of a totally separate work stream. So this is something that I believe some validators will be running at the merge. Some might not. This is, I think the like full maximal production readiness of the software is still to be known as to how that plays out probably over the next like 4 weeks. I think there's a lot of people working on it. There's a lot of people trying to get it ready. But it's probably in kind of like beta plus phase in the next like 4 weeks. Consensus layer clients are working very actively to ensure if there is a failure on this sidecar, it's a sidecar for a reason, that it wouldn't affect the functionality of the rest of the software. So there shouldn't be a lot of risk in running this software, but it is an additional kind of hurdle. When I'm thinking about the merge and thinking about running through it, to keep things simple, I might not run MEV-boost, and then maybe like a week after kind of layer that piece of software into my setup. But plenty of people will probably run it at the merge. So it's totally up to you. Any questions?
Will MEV-boost require more processing power? Oh, Micah answered.
Yeah, it's primarily just kind of a back and forth with this external piece of software. So like sending a couple of queries to a relay, but the amount of processing is negligibly increased.
I think the next question is, are the merges fully complete on the test net? I'm seeing that the sync tests on Robson are still not done. Any clarification on this? Are they conflating test nets and
No, so I
testing
think,
suites?
yeah, I think it's asking whether or not we're still doing tests on the merged test nets. And short answer is we are still running tests on them, and we probably will up to the merge on mainnet, but we consider those to be done in that like the network has transitioned and it's stable, but we'll keep running a bunch of tests on the various test nets until the mainnet merge, but not it doesn't mean that like the fact that we're running sync tests on Robson doesn't mean that like the Robson merge is not over. It just means we want to test the sync of the various clients in a bunch of combinations in a post-merge context. And Robson is just a good place to do that now because it's post-merge. But we do this on Shadow Forks. We do this, I don't know if we do it on Sepolia, but yeah, it's more like Robson is a tool for testing, but its merge is complete.
Okay, maybe they're referencing the merge checklist or something. They're saying an unchecked box. The next one, merge checklist says JWT authentication is important. Will clients handle this for me? Is there something I need to do for Lighthouse/Geth?
Right. So some clients will generate one for you if it's not passed as a parameter upon startup. That said, you do need to pass it to the other client. So for example, if Geth, I'm pretty sure Geth generates it for you if there's none. So if Geth generates a JWT token, even if Lighthouse would also generate one, you want to make sure it's the same. So at least one of your components, you need to pass it. You just passed it as like a command line flag or a config option if you're using a config file. But some clients, if it's not passed to them, will just generate it by default. But because it has to match across both sides, then you need to pass it to the other part of the stack.
Somewhat related, did we touch on fee recipient yet or no?
I did a bit earlier, but
okay.
Yes, fee recipient gets passed the same way, by the way. So, if you're running your clients, there's going to be a flag or a config option called like, -- JWT token or something like that. And then there'll be another config option called -- fee recipient. And you just need to pass obviously a JWT token to the JWT token one and an ETH address to the fee recipient one. And by an ETH address, I mean like an ETH1 execution layer ETH address, not like a validator beacon chain or like BLS formatted address. Yeah.
Right, and this is where transaction fees, if you create a block, you're entitled to the transaction fees that miners currently get once we switch over to proof of stake. So you want to make sure you're getting your proper reward amount, and setting the fee recipient is part of that.
Yep. Should I start running a node on Gordy right now or join after it's merged? So if you want to run through the merge on Gordy, now would be the right time to start running a node because you'll have time to get a validator up, get everything set up, and then you have plenty of time to be ready before the actual merge happens. So if you do plan to run a validator and run it through the merge, it makes sense to start running a node now. But that is not a requirement to like run a node on Gordy, right? Like you will still be able to start a node on Gordy after the merge and on any network. Yeah. What's the technical reason why Infura would not work with a CL client after the merge? The engine API is only running between the proper EL node and the CL node. So the rough idea there is that it's like a trusted, endpoint. So you want to trust who you're. Well, I guess take a step back. Oh, Danny has a question, but yeah, really quickly, I'll just say like Infura is not offering the engine API, so it's like you literally can't get access to it, and Daddy will walk through why it would be a bad idea, even if you could get access to it.
I keep getting muted after I unmute. Are we good?
Sorry, that was me.
Okay. There are places in the protocol where a validator might be lazy, right? You could technically offload everything and just kind of sign whatever somebody tells you to do. That's probably bad. It's bad for the protocol. It's potentially bad for your profitability. But this is kind of the lazy validator problem, and the execution layer currently has the lazy validator problem. You could just blindly sign whatever people say, or you could say, hey, Infura or somebody, can you just check this up for me? I don't want to run it. So it is technically possible to be lazy at the merge for that. But there are things called proof of custody of execution that will be layered into the protocol to ensure that there's not the lazy validator problem on the execution layer. And so Infura and others are not currently offering engine API because it's not really a sustainable business model to be offering something that will be taken out of the protocol. It's also not something that they would see as being good faith actors, because they know that it encourages a laziness of this component that will be removed from the ability to be lazy in the future. So essentially validators shouldn't be accustomed to offloading or not processing this portion, because one, that's bad for the network. Two, it will be bad for the validator as these proof of custody of execution are layered into the protocol. And so Infura, and at least everyone that I'm aware of right now, is not offering this kind of third-party service to allow you to be lazy there. In the extreme, if most validators aren't executing this, then invalid state transitions could be snuck in and somebody could print 10 million ETH. That's kind of the failure case there, and why it's very important to not do this, and for the protocol to not allow to do this over time.
Thanks.
Thank you. The next question, I think, is what percentage of validators will run MEV-boost? I'm not sure that it's like possible to know this in advance, but one thing that's worth noting is like there are other ways, for like especially sophisticated validators, like large scale operators, to do MEV. So it's not like, and just like today, there are other ways to submit MEV bundles than through Flashbots directly. So it's, it's hard to predict, not only because we don't know, but also because there's other alternatives. And it might very well be that like people run multiple, you can imagine like multiple like pieces of software, just like MEV-boost, that are different builder networks that validators want to run in parallel, because you get different bundles from them, kind of like we see on proof of work today. So I don't know that there's like a percentage estimate. And even if there is, that percentage estimate tells you how many, it tells you how many validators run Flashbots, and you can like infer maybe how much MEV goes through Flashbots, but it's not like a full overview of like the entire MEV landscape either. So yeah, I would just caveat that. And the next one is a
Go ahead.
Sorry, go. I was gonna say next one's a bit related. Like, can you run MEV-boost at the merge, or do you need the merge to be finalized? So short answer is you can. There's nothing like technically stopping it. We might disencourage it, and if the Flashbots teams, might also push that. Just in the case where if there was a bug at the merge, it's easier to debug if we can assume that it's just the execution and consensus layer client and that the issue does not come from like MEV-boost. Like Danny was saying, MEV-boost is pretty independent from like the consensus client, so it would be improbable for that to like cause the issue. But I think just to be like extra safe, we'd probably recommend not running it right at the merge and just waiting until it's finalized. But you can't like stop people from running the software. Basically, there's no thing. And there's things like, for example, Flashbots maintains a relay on MEV-boost and they can shut that down, but anyone else could run a relay. So it's not like Flashbots doesn't have can't single-handedly control whether or not people use the software. And basically the trade-off there is you get like better visibility into what happens if something goes wrong, and you get less visibility and like a less transparent MEV extraction for that period. So like on chain, you might see just like a bit more chaos related to MEV, but then at least at the like node software level, things if things go wrong, it's easier to debug and run through. And in the happy case, like we expect finalization to take like 12 minutes after the merge. So it's, can maybe imagine like an hour or so without MEV-boost being on. Yeah.
Next question is for the merged networks, like Robson, do we still need the TTD parameter when bootstrapping the node, say after an upgrade?
So yeah, that's a good question. So you need it, and unfortunately, there's not a simple answer. You need it as long as the client has not hard coded it as part of the configs. So for example, and I don't know off the top of my head who has and who hasn't, but like you would want to look in like the config file of the network that you're running. So say Robson in your case, and check, is the TTD that's set there actually the real TTD, or is it still the fake number, like the extremely high number? If it's the high number, then you would need to keep that flag, and otherwise you would need to remove it, or you can still keep it, but you could remove it. But different clients may or may not have upgraded that as part of their default releases. So that's a bit of a disappointing answer, but you just need to look, and I suspect clients would have that in their release notes as well once they like update the change. Yeah, and that might be something actually. Yeah, we can probably like put together just like a list of like as the networks merge, which client version can you run, and like it will just work out of the box in a post-merge setting.
Next question I see is there any plan for how to receive staked ETH rewards after the Shanghai update? I'm not sure whether this is referring to like staked ETH.
Withdrawals and partial withdrawals.
Okay. But I don't know what the actual question is. Like if withdrawals are enabled, they'll just be enabled.
Yeah, so currently Shanghai, which is the planned hard fork for after the merge, at this point, I believe there's general consensus to include withdrawals. There is this crosses layers. So this is a consensus layer and execution layer upgrade, in which there's kind of these two components and an area of the protocol in which these two components speak. Right now, it's expected that exited validators who then also do a change of withdrawal credential operation to make sure they have 0x01 or execution layer address withdrawal credentials, then on some cadence would be swept into the withdrawals queue, and their entire balance, including any rewards, would go into the execution layer. Additionally, it looks as though to reduce the incentive to churn the validator set, there would be kind of a partial withdrawals function where if you have what's again called an OX01 or execution layer address withdrawal credential or ETH1 withdrawal credentials, if you have those set up, which you can set up with a new message, your balances in excess of 32 ETH on some cadence, depending on the size of the validator set, would be swept into the withdrawals queue and land in that address specified in the execution layer. So to make that clear, there is the functionality to exit, get all of your ETH into the execution layer back into normal Ethereum addresses. And there's the ability to, on some cadence, have your rewards swept into the execution layer. There is a link that's kind of a meta spec that references the EIPs and the different things going on in the consensus layer spec. And I will find that link and drop it in here. But yes, there's a plan. Yes, there's some additional testing to still do. But yes, there's also general consensus on how to do this. And it's just kind of doing some final refinements and then going into the whole engineering testing and production phase.
Yeah, and if this question was referring to staked ETH derivatives like Lido, for example, or Coinbase, if there is anything that Coinbase were to offer in the future, all of these decisions are made independently by those organizations. Lido is freely transferable, but if Coinbase were to offer something, it may be a completely different schedule than what mainnet does.
Yeah, and importantly, when withdrawals are enabled, when partial withdrawals are enabled, any of these mechanisms that essentially were giving you IOUs have the ability to issue you actually the ETH that's behind it. But as Trent said, that would probably require doing and enabling something technical on their end. So hard to say what their independent timeline is.
And one final note I'll add on that. So this is all about like beacon chain withdrawals, but we touched earlier that at the merge, transaction fees are available to validator. So if you do hold like a derivative, whether it's Lido or a centralized one on Binance or Coinbase or Rocket Pool or whatnot, it is a good question to ask to like the party that's managing that, like what is their plan with regards to transaction fees and MEV, because yeah, that is immediately available. And so you could imagine, you know, anything from the operator keeping 100% of it to the operator distributing 100% of it as it comes in. And all those things are very much technically possible. So there is no, you know, if your operator is telling you they cannot distribute transaction fees because like withdrawals are not live, that's just not true. And it might, you know, it might require like technical work for them to like orchestrate that and manage it at scale. But yeah, I think this is a good question to ask if you hold such derivatives.
Cool. I think the next chunk of questions were taken care of in the chat. So thank you people who are jumping in there.
I do think, yeah, the Gordy one is worth explaining a bit more because
Sure.
It's a bit weird. So Gordy today runs under proof of authority. So that means that there's a limited set of whitelisted operators who can produce blocks on the network. And then it is merging with the Praetor beacon chain, which is open for anyone to join. So this means that at the merge, just like how on mainnet miners stop being relevant to the consensus, the Gordy proof of authority signers stop being relevant to the consensus, and the consensus is taken over by this public beacon chain that is Praetor. And we're all just going to call it Gordy after it's merged. But yeah, this is what happens. So even though you cannot be a validator on Gordy today, anyone can be after the merge. And then Sepolia basically was the opposite. So Sepolia was running proof of work before its merge, and anyone could mine on Sepolia. And then after the merge, because we want to provide like a stable testnet basically we've restricted the set of validators on the network. So it's just like, I guess, proof of authority, like people can join if they are whitelisted, and there's like a process for that. But the goal is to have entities who like want to run these validators for many years and who are like highly dependent, so that people can use Sepolia as like a really secure or really stable testing environment for smart contracts. So it's like, yeah, it's kind of weird because Gordy is going from permissioned to unpermissioned, and then Sepolia is going from unpermissioned to permissioned. But it's just good to have both types of test nets, because obviously you want validators to be able to test stuff, but also it's valuable to just have a test net where you know the validator set is going to run no matter what, because there's no incentive to maintain a testnet validator. Okay, a bunch of questions about Infura that have all been answered with no, so I won't go over that. Before the merge, can anyone run a node on Gordy? Yes. And even, by the way, after the merge, if you want to run a node on, say, Sepolia, which has a permission validator set, you can, just like on mainnet, you can run a node without being a validator. And when you do that, one, you can submit transactions, query blocks, and query history, like independently of any third-party service, but you also validate that the blocks produced on the network are valid. So every single node on the network, when they get a block, they run through each transaction and make sure that it's actually correct. So it's almost like the term validator is like a bit weird, because every node on the network actually validates the blocks, whether or not they build it or attest to it in the proof of stake protocol. So there is value in like running your own node, even though you're not a validator, to yourself, because you can just interact with the network permissionlessly, but also to the network, because this is how you kind of protect against validators colluding and deciding to change their protocol rules. It's by having a large set of nodes outside of these validators that act as kind of a check on the system. Like if a validator creates a bad block, all the other nodes will just be able to notice that. Okay, there's a question about like the merge date. So September 19th, I would not use that as a merge date. We were like roughly trying to estimate when it could happen. It might happen during that week. It could be the week before, the week after. If we found an issue, it could be weeks after that. I think people want this to happen soon, and like we are trending well towards like having it happen earlier this fall rather than later this fall. But there's always the risk, say we did this Gordy merge, or even independent of the Gordy merge, say we find a really bad issue tomorrow. We will obviously prioritize like a safe merge over a quick one. Yeah, so I wouldn't like, make any, I don't know, bets or like have a large financial stake riding on the merge happening on September 19th. But I think it's like a rough target that people think is possible if things continue roughly at their current pace. Yeah. I
think that might be it in terms of questions. Oh, there was a new one about MEV-boost. Unless I missed something.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. There's a last question about MEV-boost and like, yeah, and the sort of legality aspects of accepting certain bundles. First, you don't need to run MEV-boost. Like so, MEV-boost gives you potentially more transaction fees, and like obviously those transaction fees are extracted through MEV, and there's a whole like spectrum of MEV, including like, yeah, sandwich attacks, which is like front running. So this is why, by the way, there might be a world where you see like large entities maybe not run MEV-boost, maybe they'll run their own kind of MEV. Maybe they'll run no MEV, first of all, but you could very much imagine a large regulated entity running like their own MEV relay, which like blacklists certain types of bundles, right? And they can run analysis on the bundle and say, oh, this is front running, we don't want to do this. So we're just not going to accept this bundle. And you can imagine this is like a legal thing, but there is like this long tail NFT MEVs when people like fat finger, selling their punk for like 8 way instead of 80 ETH or something. You could very much imagine like some entity not wanting to like be the one who like liquidates that punk and like allows that MEV to be captured. So yeah, different entities can choose what they do.
And
yeah.
I would say a couple of things. One, like who knows? And who knows in what jurisdiction. And I think anyone who speaks confidently as to knowing one way or the other doesn't know. And then the other is that the way the MEV-boost architecture works is that it allows for open relays. So there might be relays that are highly optimizing profit and things, but there's also kind of a hope that maybe some sort of alternative relays exist where maybe there's a relay that does no sandwiching or no destructive MEV and only constructive MEV, like pushing the arbitrage of a Uniswap market back into place and not front running that opportunity as well. So hopefully we see a proliferation of different kind of strategies available through these different relays, such that you can make the decision that you want, or you can, as Marius, not even run MEV-boost and use the good old mempool.
And we did see this on proof of work, by the way. Like there were some miners who had different setups and it's not based on like jurisdiction. So like, yeah, I think, there's definitely no requirement to run it.
I think we're all caught up on questions. Now is the time to write it out in the chat if you had something you were thinking about. The Thursday question.
What's the Thursday question?
Christine, I thought CL clients were coordinating on Thursday's call to figure out to configure MEV-boost to only activate after the beacon chain is finalized post-merge.
Yeah, so it is, there is a MEV-boost specification item to say that consensus layer clients won't run, even though the software is there, won't actually dip into the builder network to get blocks until after the merge is finalized. It seems like there's general consensus, and it seems like this will be baked into clients. It does seem like Flashbots, who will operate a relay, will also honor this. But there's nothing stopping anyone from modifying software or utilizing alternative relays or whatever. But I believe that kind of the majority network will probably, that does choose to run MEV-boost, will be restricted, and for a few epochs until finality and stability, wouldn't be using this kind of alternative network, which I think is, as we said before, very good for if something goes wrong. It helps us kind of isolate that from the concerns a bit, so that we can debug a bit easier and quicker. But we'll see.
Final questions.
If not, then we can run through the classics and then share a bunch of links about where people can keep track of things. The first one I'll share is a few people have mentioned it in the chat, but the merge mainnet readiness checklist. This isn't necessarily always up to date, but I'd say it's a pretty accurate tracker for what things are happening and what things still need to be done. People go through it periodically and add the checklist, but this is a pretty good reference if you're looking for things to follow. And then related to the date, like generally, yes, there's a rough idea of when this could happen on mainnet, but to be clear, there's no specific day, there's no specific time. Anybody who tells you that is wrong, or they have a misunderstanding. So when there is a specific date, it will be announced on the Ethereum blog and throughout the broader ecosystem. There'll be enough time for people to understand when it's actually happening. What else? If you're running, if you're participating in validation, do not depend on Infura. You won't be able to use your Infura execution Infura for execution post-merge, you need to start running your own execution client locally. That was an option pre-merge, but post-merge, it will not be available. These are the classics I was thinking of, Tim, if you have any other ones. You need to set your free recipient if you're validating. We went through that on the call. There's some resources, I think, in the agenda. What am I missing?
Okay, so Pooja had something in the chat I want to highlight. The Casperters have been doing these Peep and Eep series, going over a bunch of different EIPs for probably over a year now. Recently, they've done one-on-ones with all the different client teams, kind of walking through like how they've implemented the merge, what's special about their clients and whatnot. So I really recommend if you're like, considering choosing a minority client, there's basically a 1-hour video with every one of them. And if it's not there, it'll be out soon, that you can check out on that playlist. So it's really good. Yeah, Danny, you want to take Christine's question?
Yeah. So currently all clients utilize this engine API. So the question is it requisite that you use the engine API, or are there alternatives? So there's the kind of the core specs. The core specs tell you the state transition. They tell you how to talk on the network and that kind of stuff, but they don't really tell you about client architecture. The engine API is to facilitate a particular type of client architecture. And this client architecture, the reason that it exists and the reason that it's so pervasive is that the history of there being these clients that are really good and specialized on transactions and EVM execution and that kind of stuff. Those are the execution layer clients. And we have these clients and pieces of software that are very specialized at managing the beacon chain, and managing proof of stake, validators, balances, BLS signatures, all that kind of stuff. And so it's very natural to unify these pieces of software over an interface, and that is the engine API. That historically is very natural. It also would be very natural to look at all these specs and write one big piece of software and call it a client. And so the engine API does not preclude that from happening, but there's not currently, from my knowledge, even a project that's very actively pursuing this. I know that Nimbus does have a very nascent execution layer client, and they're considering doing an integrated build with an optional engine API if you don't want to use one side or the other. And any piece of any domain that does have clients on both sides of the aisle in the same language, people might experiment with that in the future. But right now, 100% of the production clients are utilizing this engine API thing.
Question about the DOS post for proposers.
Yeah, so validators leak information. They make a lot of messages, and it is very likely possible to reverse engineer where the origin of those messages with respect to IP, and kind of figure out where validators live on nodes. And then some of these roles, especially the proposer role, is known in advance. So the concern would be that you could actively targeted DOS proposers. There are a couple of, so yes, this is possible. It's certainly possible. And then there are engineering and kind of like the way nodes are set up mitigations. And then there are protocol mitigations. So in the event that this happened, if it happened, home stakers would probably scramble to utilize more advanced setups to help get around this. And I know there's some people working on even better mitigations allowed in clients. Like I think Lighthouse is enabling a kind of a Sentry node architecture. Some people are experimenting with how to use OpenVPN and rotate VPNs to allow to help prevent DOS and other things like that. So more of like practical mitigations in the event that this happened, that you would certainly see kind of a scramble to get the practical mitigations out. There are also other kind of protocol mitigations like single secret leader election. So instead of that proposer being known in advance, the proposer knows in advance, but everyone else doesn't know. And that proposer then makes a proof when they make their block. This is under very active development, but it's hard to say when exactly it would come out to mainnet. It's kind of one of those like security features that is always competing with user features. So it's like, okay, do we enhance the security of the protocol or do we get out sharding or something like that? There's kind of always a careful balance between those two types of things. Additionally, there's research into more private networking components. So imagine leveraging certain types of network constructions like Dandelion++, where you pass messages around secretly before they kind of enter into the network. And so it's not clear who the origin of the message was. So there's a lot of good research paths along that way, but there's also a lot of good practical mitigations that'll be leveraged in the event of attack.
We are at time. Thank you everybody for joining. Tim, you have any like final things that you want to go over? I would say if you're a validator, being on this call is great, but if you haven't participated in any testnets and you're currently running validators for the beacon chain, you need to participate in Gurley. Don't run your setup on the mainnet merge without having participated in a testnet merge. This is, I don't know how else I can stress this, but you should test your stuff before we go to mainnet. It's coming soon and it will be here sooner than you expect if you're not paying attention and trying to test your stuff ahead of time. I just wanted to stress that again. If you're a miner, part of the mining community, please pass this to them. I know the merge has been a long time coming. It's been a long journey to get here, but it's very close. If you're a part of a mining community, just please be aware of this. I think enough of this has trickled out to those communities that it's, you know, commonly understood to be close, but can't hurt to remind people. So yeah, validators, please test your setups on the existing test nets and the upcoming merge transition, and try to dig into the literature that people have made available, the stuff that's linked in the agenda, and you won't regret it. And sign up for the Google group. That's where you're going to get updates. Follow the Ethereum blog. The merge is soon. Anything final, Tim?
No, that sounds great.
Thank you everybody again for joining, and for the people that answered questions in the chat and asked questions. Really appreciate it. We'll see everyone for the next community call, maybe in a couple weeks-ish. We'll see how it goes, but again, we'll announce it ahead of time. All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a good rest of your day wherever you are.
Thank you.